What began as nothing more than another butchery case involved into one of the greatest crime investigations in all of Korean history, with around 21,000 suspects questioned, all while the perpetrator attacked and assaulted more than a dozen women in disturbingly morbid ways. For 3 decades, the police couldn't discover the Hwaesong criminal's true identity. They resorted to dark tactics to appease the public, actions so vile they were immortalized in Bong Joon-ho's 2003 film. How was the Hwaesong criminal so adept at concealing his tracks? And what dark secret was the police hiding for so long? This is the story of an unresolved mark of trauma in Korean history, the case of the Hwaesong criminal. It all began with the disappearance of Lee Won-im, a 71-year-old woman, on September 15, 1986. Lee Won-im was returning home after visiting her daughter. During the 80s, Hwaesong was a rural home area for around 226,000 people, scattered through a collection of villages. A growing community with welcoming rice wine bars, Korean-style coffee shops, farmers and factory workers here and there. It was the sort of town where everyone knew each other. Violent crime was unusual here and rare in Korea as a whole, save for break-in or minor robberies. But then, someone discovered the missing Lee Won-im's lifeless body in a pasture 4 days later. The villagers promptly reported this to the police, thinking of them as skilled enough to track the perpetrator. A month later, 25-year-old Park Hyun-suk disappeared after she got off the bus, also returning home from the city of Songtan. 3 days later, her body was found in a canal. The police had yet to link any of these tragedies, thinking of these cases as unfortunate but unrelated incidents. 2 months passed, and on December 12, 1986, another 25-year-old woman disappeared. Her name was Kwon Jung-bon, last seen in front of her house before vanishing and then being found in an embankment. 3 females found lifeless within 3 months. The people of Hwaesong grew restless, and the police finally marked it as a serious case, earning it media attention. The crimes kept happening, people were on the edge, and incompetent police had to invite investigators from nearby cities to assist them. Vigilante squads were formed to patrol the streets at night, with men armed with sticks searching for the perpetrator's hideout. Women avoided going out after dark, as most of the victims were housewives, schoolgirls, and one of them a department store worker. With no streetlights to guide them through the night, women walked afraid of every man they encountered. They were told never to wear red clothes because supposedly the perpetrator preferred to attack women wearing that color. As we'll discover, this was later weaponized by the police. Men were equally afraid as the women because while they were at a smaller risk of being butchered, they'd be questioned by the police, which was known for using sharper methods with their interrogatories. The once bustling rice wine bars were now empty at night, for any male could be mistaken as a criminal at any time. As the investigation progressed, the police spotted a pattern in all of the crimes. That's because serial criminals tend to have signature styles where they attack and dispatch their victims in similar ways. First, the first 5 crimes all took place within a relatively small 3.7-mile radius of the city of Hwaesong. Using this knowledge, the police spread out in pairs, dotting every 100 meters to see if they could find the perpetrator. He normally bound and gagged the victims between assaulting them, and then used one of their clothing items like panties or stockings to strangle them with them. Investigators theorized that the Hwaesong criminal wished to relieve some kind of unfulfilled desire through these acts. Female police officers leveraged the superstition of wearing red and intentionally wore red clothing to lure the perpetrator into a trap. Eventually, some of the villagers performed a shamanistic ritual on a voodoo scarecrow to see if at least that yielded some result. Nothing so far. The first suspect sketch was created based on the memory of Kong, a bus driver, and the bus conductor, who supposedly witnessed a man get in on the bus minutes after the estimated time of the seventh crime of September 7, 1988. The description of the perpetrator was that of a thin-framed man in his mid-20s, a height of between 5 feet and 5 inches and 5 feet and 6 inches, and short-cut, sporty-type hair. The man had a sharp nose and lacked double eyelids. Some of the assaulted women matched the description and added that he had soft hands. Another survivor, Lee Jim-ran, claimed the perpetrator was skinny with a low voice. Almost all of the crimes took place at the same time frame, between 19 o'clock and 23 o'clock, except for the first one, which was at 6 o'clock. But who among the 226,000 inhabitants of Hwaesong could be the perpetrator? They also discovered that the wrongdoer had a B blood type, which would be useful for what little DNA sampling solutions they had. Korea lacked the necessary equipment for DNA analysis at the time, so for a long while all samples had to be sent to the USA for proper identification, as by the late 1980s, forensic science was still underdeveloped. The investigation broke records, with police lodging more than 2 million days on the case. 40,116 people had their fingerprints taken, and around 570 DNA samples and 180 hair samples were analyzed. 7 more crimes took place over the next 4 years, with the last of these believed to have been that of Kwon Sung-song. At age 69, Sung-song's lifeless body was discovered on a hill, with signs of assault, body fluids from a male, and strangulation with a pantyhose. The newspapers had the entire country in fear, and the police needed a lead fast. If nothing appeared, they'd have to figure out a solution to appease the media. Knowing that confessions without evidence were enough to get someone convicted at the time, the police resorted to drastic measures. A man named Yoon Song-yu lived in a nearby village of Taeonop, working as a repairman. One night, just as he was about to eat dinner, the police showed up at his home. He instantly knew what this meant. They took him to a small interrogation room with a single table at a local police station. He was handcuffed in the interrogation room for all 3 days, barely eaten, and wasn't allowed to sleep. Police would wake him up, prompting him to suffer memory lapses. Through these and other sharp methods, the police extracted a confession. Yoon's confession described how on the night of the crimes he had gone outside for a walk to get some air. Childhood polio had left him with a terrible limp, enough to exempt him from the compulsory Korean military service, forcing him to stop himself several times to rest. Supposedly, he found the house with a light on and felt a sudden need for intimacy. So he climbed into the house and forced himself onto the young girl. Then he burned his clothes and went home. At 22 years old, Yoon was linked to the crime of the 8th victim, the 14-year-old Park Sang-hee. Supposedly, hair samples found at the crime scene had a 40% match with Yoon's, although this could have been intentionally mixed. However, it was clear that this was a copycat crime, a crime modeled after a previous one. That's because the 10th and 9th victims had different DNA samples. Both of their butchery methods and locations were different from the remaining cases, hinting at a different perpetrator. So either it was Yoon or there were multiple crimes. Yoon might not have been the Hwaesong butcher, and the police were aware of this, but he'd be a good enough scapegoat for now. Yoon's past employer even went out of business as he couldn't continue his company without Yoon's skills. He was sentenced to life in prison. Yoon appealed the ruling, claiming that the police coerced him into giving false confessions through sharp interrogations, something well known by many other suspects. In fact, the police's questioning methods were so gruesome that at least 4 possible suspects took their lives in the 1990s after their investigation. The police defended themselves at the time by claiming that an official document noted that a witness was present when Yoon confessed. The appeal was unjustly denied, forcing him to serve 19.5 years in jail before being released on parole in 2009. A police agency chief, part of the investigation, would later admit that they had indeed assaulted Yoon to force him into making a false confession. Decades passed, but the crimes never really left the public's memory, and much less now that they were immortalized in a movie. The case inspired Korean director Bong Joon-ho, director of Academy Award winner Parasite, to film a movie based on the story of the killer in 2003. The movie masterfully portrays the disorganization and lack of discipline of the police while performing the investigations, especially the fact that they use sharp methods to extract false confessions. The film returns society's public attention to the crimes of this unfinished investigation. Another butchery of a female college student, precisely in Hwaesong, took place in 2004, leading the public to believe the Hwaesong butcher was loose once more. By 2006, finding the butcher was rendered nearly pointless. You see, there's a 15-year-old statute of limitation for South Korean first-degree butchery. So, even if the criminal's identity was found, they couldn't be persecuted for their crime anyway. Not that it would be needed, as we'll discover. Fast forward to September 2019, and Gyeonggi-Nambu Provincial Police Superintendent General Bang Gi-soo announced that the DNA evidence of around 3 of the crimes matched one man, Lee Chun-Jae. Lee Choon-Jae had a good education from a young age and worked well with other classmates. He was a well-adjusted kid until his younger brother drowned during Lee's childhood, traumatizing him for life. Despite the tragedy, Lee's academic career went on smoothly. He graduated high school and even joined the Republic of Korea Army, serving as a tank driver for compulsory military service. Lee was already in prison serving a life sentence for another crime, the butchery of his sister-in-law. The police had questioned Lee at the original time of the Hwaesong crimes. He even had a watch of one of the victims on him, but the police never paid attention to this little but oh so important detail. What they did do was question him for not having his ID card on him and set him free quickly after. He performed crime after crime, but hundreds of police forces never suspected him. They always questioned the people around him instead. The discovery also left the authorities in an embarrassing position because Yoon spent nearly 20 years in jail for a crime he did not commit. When questioned, the now 57-year-old Lee Choon-Jae nonchalantly admitted in court that he was responsible for the 14 butcheries 3 decades ago. The cherry on top was how he expressed surprise that he wasn't caught earlier. He casually discussed how he made little effort to conceal the evidence due to the police's sheer incompetence. Why wasn't I a suspect? When questioned about his reasons for slaughtering the 13-year-old girl, he displayed no emotion, speaking of the crime as if he were talking about buying ice cream after work. More surprisingly enough, Lee apologized to the family members of his victims and the falsely convicted Yoon. He was regretful for the people who had been investigated and wrongly suffered. Lee methodically drew on a piece of paper to explain the location of each of his crimes. Lee claimed how he came and testified and described the crimes, hoping to give the victims and families some closure when the truth is revealed, and that he'd live with his life with repent. The Korean legal system's intricacies made it impossible to try Lee even after him pleading guilty to the crimes, since he's already been sentenced to life imprisonment. Persistence to get justice, Yoon filed for retrial on his case on November 13, 2019, and police quickly declared that Lee was responsible for the crime, for which Yoon was convicted. Today, Yoon is a sociable man in his 50s, still with a limp, and making the most out of his life post-imprisonment. Even when freed from prison, it took him 3 years to adjust to how the world had changed. But he was determined to get his honor back and clear his false accusation. He was finally found innocent in 2020, possibly expecting around $1 million in compensation. While no amount of money can give him his years back, nor can justice be provided to the families of those butchered, at least the people of Hwaesong can rest assured that the perpetrator will hurt no more women.